Hi everyone, welcome to the Climate Confident podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today I have my special guest Gareth. Gareth, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks, Tom. Gareth Evans, locally based in San Diego, CEO of Veckta, the energy transition platform. Yeah, super excited to get to hang out today.
Nice, thank you. So for people who might be unaware, Gareth, you said Veckta, and it's an energy transition platform. Can you give us a little more detail than that? What is Veckta and how is it involved in the energy transition?
Yep. So Veckta, we specialize in on-site energy, behind-the-meter solutions for commercial and industrial businesses. And really what we want to support business leaders around the world to achieve is they're setting these carbon reduction goals and objectives, and timeframes are looming, and a lot of talk isn't necessarily turning into action. And there's many reasons for this. And part of it is just one, they don't know what's possible. They don't know who to turn to. They don't know where to begin. It's a confusing landscape. And so we've built a platform that integrates their ability to be able to baseline their situation today. How much energy am I using? Where am I using it? How much is it costing me? What's my emission profile? What are my objectives? And then what are my options for getting there? And we help them look at energy efficiency, on-site energy, and then whatever emissions are left after taking those two on, then you can move on to renewable energy credits or virtual power purchase agreements. And so we specialize in the on-site energy piece as a priority because we believe that's where you can not only reduce your emissions, but you can also reduce your costs and increase your business resilience. So you get a 3-for-1 win versus all the other options. They play to one of those factors.
Okay. When you say on-site energy, are you referring to the likes of solar panels, less likely wind turbines, and on-site storage? Is that kind of where you're pitching?
Exactly, Tom. Yeah, some people refer to it as distributed energy. Microgrids is another term used. These are all kind of subsets of that. But yes, it's essentially what you or I could do at our homes, scaled up on a commercial or industrial scale. So we look at everything from solar, storage, wind, gas generators, in some case diesel still as a backup, but that's certainly becoming far less common. Battery energy storage, electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cells. So we can look at any of those solution sets. And that's what makes it complex for customers, is because there are lots of options. And depending on where you're located, what your utility connections are, how you use your energy, these all influence what the optimal solution will be. We specialize in being completely solution agnostic, so we don't care what the outcome is, in terms of the technology configuration. We just want to make sure the business achieves whatever their objective is at the right price point. We certainly believe that sustainability is achievable with profitability, not at the expense of. And so how do you get both of them at the same time?
Okay. So what industries are you supporting typically? Is it across the board, or are there particular industries that are more amenable to your solution or better suited for your solution, or how does it break out?
Yeah, the actual platform itself is sector agnostic. Where we've seen the biggest need and opportunity today is primarily in the manufacturing sector, very high energy use, under a lot of pressure to reduce their emissions, particularly if they're in the supply chain that's associated with the energy transition. So we're seeing a lot of car manufacturers, people who are developing parts for that supply chain. The core top of the food chain businesses are setting these objectives, and then they're pushing them down through the supply chain. And so we're seeing a lot of interest on the manufacturing side. Food and beverage is another big one. Food and beverage processing, it can be everything from cold chain logistics to the actual production of it, to then the grocery stores, microbreweries. The reason why this industry we're seeing a lot of traction is because they've got perishable goods, so they can't afford the power to go off. They typically operate on fairly lean margins, so any cost savings become a real benefit. And then because they are consumer facing, there's an emission reduction need from their customers. So I'd say that's where we're seeing the biggest opportunity today. But mining, oil and gas, REITs, big companies with large real estate portfolios. Typically an ideal customer for us is someone who's got more than one site and they've got a fairly big challenge in terms of where they should prioritize their time and effort and, and investment. How are we going to get the biggest return on investment to achieve whatever their objective is?
Okay. And what's the driving force behind it for your customers typically? I mean, there isn't a particular burning platform, or is there, that I'm missing? I mean, I know customers are starting to demand it. In some cases, employees are starting to demand it. So for recruitment and retention, it's important. Are there regulatory pressures coming as well, or there right now as well? And all this as well differs from region to region and geo to geo. I get that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll finish with the emission reduction piece because that's particularly interesting. I'd say there is quite literally a burning platform in the likes of California where I'm sat, where, in the US in particular, the grid in some cases is 100 years old. The infrastructure that is providing our energy, 170, 50, even if it's 30 years old, these components are starting at the end of life. They're becoming more expensive to maintain, harder to operate, and they're really not designed to be able to deal with our modern day needs and wants, and they certainly can't take on any more capacity. And so as we're bringing on big utility scale projects, more electric vehicle charging stations, this is putting increasing pressure on the grid. And certainly here with the wildfires, with severe heat impacts in the likes of Texas, where they've had the deep cold snaps, in Florida, where they've got the hurricanes, all of these instances are creating a lot more power outages. And so in the US alone, I think 2021, the stat is businesses lost $150 billion of revenue from power outages alone. So, a lot of people aren't necessarily acutely aware of this until it happens to them. And so what we want them to be doing is thinking proactively, cost of one outage and losing production for hours or days can actually pay for an entire system that will then last you 10, 20, 30 years. So that's on the resilience side. On the cost side, certainly, rates are going up minimum of 3 to 5% a year. And we're hearing customers experiencing 40% year-on-year escalations. And it's impossible to manage your business when you're being exposed to those sort of cost uncertainties. And that's happened obviously in Europe, North America, everywhere right now, particularly on the back of what is happening in Ukraine. So they're real key drivers that can be influenced by getting the right energy solution. And then on the emission side, there's lots of factors. Capital markets are now starting to demand it. So anyone who wants to go to the capital markets, they're certainly being asked, what's your strategy for being more sustainable, greener? So anyone who wants to get access to cheaper capital, they need to be shown that they've got a plan. Regulators are starting to demand that you start to report how you're performing. We're seeing stock prices, those who reduce their emissions versus those that increase them. There's a 12% differential. So you can imagine for the benefit of the business, there's a huge differential. And then, boards and CEOs and leadership teams are setting some pretty aggressive targets, and they haven't necessarily figured out how to do it yet. And so they're doing that because they know it's good for their brand. They know it's good for their business. And ultimately, when they do it right, it's good for their bottom line. And so that's the real opportunity, is emission reduction is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the way to get ahead as a business today by being proactive and getting it done right. And we do hear some customers say, can I just wait for the utility? My utility is committing to reducing their emissions. But what we're seeing is utility scale projects are typically taking 5-10 years to deploy, regulatory permitting, interconnection agreements, and then let alone the kind of not in my backyard, the kind of NIMBY approach to this now. People don't want big power plants. They don't want transmission lines passing through their backyards. And so it's very hard to get these projects up. And so the expectation that the utilities who have operated the way they've operated for the last 100 years are going to suddenly change the way they operate and suddenly accelerate these projects, it's not going to happen. And so if we wait for the utilities, we're certainly not going to hit the emission reduction targets we want.
Okay, cool. And can you talk me through some kind of successful projects that you've rolled out, either with named companies or not, just to talk about, some of the savings people have or companies have seen and the kind of imaginative solutions that have been rolled out?
Yep. Yeah, I can talk about a few different stages. So starting at kind of the small end of the spectrum, just so people can understand the different scales and opportunities. Worked with a brewery in Northern California who are experiencing half a dozen power outages a year minimum. Up in Northern California, they experience what's called power safety shutoffs. So anytime it gets too hot, it gets too windy, there's a risk of a wildfire. Even if there isn't a wildfire yet, they'll shut off your power. And so you can imagine trying to run a brewery where you're entertaining people, you're trying to produce the beer. If the power goes off, it not only affects front of house, but you can lose product as well.
Lose a batch, yeah.
And then it becomes a real pain, because now you have to have approval to dispose of it, because you're now disposing of a taxable product. And so the knock-on effects are quite significant. And so they've gone through a process with a microgrid developer where they spent a year essentially being sold a solution. So the challenge in the industry today is business owners don't know what to ask for. And so the supply side is pushing them products: buy my solar panels, buy my storage, buy my contract, essentially. We went through an entire year. That developer did a bunch of perceived free work for them, designed a system, put a contract in front of them. And at the end of that process, the contract were completely unfavorable terms. And luckily for this owner, he was formerly a lawyer, so he knew that the term looked right. And so he then had to go back to scratch. He had to start all over again. We're introduced to him, and in less than 3 months, he was able to configure a solution, design it. In this case, it was solar plus storage. He was able to design a system that would cost him less than what he was paying utility today in the form of an energy as a service contract, reduces emissions by 80%, and be able to ride through an outage of up to several days for critical infrastructure. And so he designed the system, developed this request for proposal in our marketplace, pushed it out. He got bids back from multiple suppliers, was able to negotiate, and then ultimately award the contract. And so that's a real good success story, in the sense that you can see the difference in timescales: a year and getting nothing done, and then 3 months and having competitive, vibrant solutions where you're in control of the process. You're telling the market, here's what I want you to quote me, versus here, I'm willing to be sold to. And then we also have worked with a steel manufacturing producer globally. They've got multiple sites around the world. We looked at several of their highest priority sites, and there's one in particular where they can save $400,000 a year in cost savings alone, while also reducing their emissions by just shy of 25%. And they've gone through the screening, the assessment, and their project is actually just about to go into the marketplace for suppliers to bid on. And you can imagine the suppliers also love this, because they're now being presented with a highly bankable, viable project that's already been pre-vetted, pre-developed, configured, and now they just need to put a proposal together. So they have no cost of sale, no sales, no marketing. They haven't had to do any of this kind of free consulting. And I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge our customers face is, and they pay a small fee to Veckta to do this assessment work, but they can use the marketplace for free. But they're used to being told, we will assess this for you for free, but they don't realize that all that cost gets rolled into the back end, and that's what drives up their overall contract value. So there's these hidden costs. So we kind of see it as being a very cheap insurance policy to make sure that you're truly understanding what's right for you versus what the market is telling you is right for you. So there's a few examples, different ends of the spectrum, very high energy intensity steel manufacturing right through to kind of small microbrewery. And there's lots in between.
Okay. And you've mentioned now for the first time the marketplace. That's something you hadn't mentioned up until now. So for people who are listening who, might want to know a little bit more about that, what is the marketplace you're talking about, and how does that fit into your platform?
Yeah. So this is kind of the real crux of the future of our business. Today we're supporting businesses to vet, validate baseline, assess what they want to do, really through necessity, just because the market, it's young. Business leaders need that education. They need that support. They want to have the data-driven opportunity to make informed decisions to then build a project. And so we've built all that infrastructure to get them to a point of being able to use the marketplace. But what Veckta really is a marketplace platform. And so we've developed the infrastructure whereby once you've got that solution that you want to go buy, We've developed the infrastructure to step you through all the things you need to be thinking about. What are the contract terms? How do I want to pay for the energy? Do I want to self-finance it? Do I want someone else to pay for it, build it, own it, operate it, and just sell me energy on a monthly basis as an energy as a service bill? Who's responsible for the construction? When do I want it built by? Here's my success criteria. So we stepped them through all those questions that they'd never think to necessarily ask. And then now they're putting into the market a very succinct, powerful request, such that they now can get comparable bids back from the highest qualified suppliers in the market. So we have over 4,000 suppliers in our marketplace. If their specifications match the project type based on location, technology, contract terms, they receive the opportunity, and then they bid for it within the platform. And then the customer has the ability to compare those bids side by side, rank them, negotiate, and then ultimately award the work. And so it's almost like your Expedia of today for your holiday buying experience. You plug in a few variables. I want to go to this type of destination, these type of dates, show me my options, versus in the past it was I had to find an airline, a hotel, a rental car, insurance, and it was all separate, or I'd have to pay a travel agent a huge amount of money to go and figure that out for me. That's the kind of consulting equivalent in our industry today. So we built the Expedia version for the energy transition. Here's my variables, here's what I want to achieve, and then here's my options for achieving that. Which one seems to align with my best interests?
Okay. And for your customers then, once they have that solar and storage in place in the case of the brewery or whatever it is, is that the end of it? Is that the end of your involvement, or do you continue working with them to help them reduce their emissions further?
Yeah, great question. And we definitely keep working with them. So the way our platform is set up, they've got their executive style dashboard. Here's my emission profiles across my portfolio. Here's where I am. Here's where I want to get to. I've now deployed this project or these projects. How has that moved the needle for me? And what we are able to do is monitor the performance of the asset that's deployed, monitor that in real time. And so they can not only see how the asset's performing actually versus what the suppliers maybe want them to see. So they get true transparency on, are they getting what they paid for? And then secondly, then that helps them really validate, here is my emission reduction profile, here's my cost savings. And then that rolls into their dashboard. And so they're able to track their progress in real time, and they're able to then use that for their internal or external reporting, and then also drive future decisions. So, all right, I now achieved 50% emission reduction with this on-site energy system, and I reduced 20% through my energy efficiency deployments, but I've still got 30% left. What are my options for doing that? And so we can look at kind of the macro trends around what are the prices of RECs. We can refer them to other people who specialize in virtual power purchase agreements, because they're still going to potentially have to offset that last 30%. So we want to be that integrated platform to drive all decisions, baseline all their data, centralize decision-making across an organization. And it's super collaborative. They can have as many users in there as they want. Provide legal representation, finance, CEOs, CFOs, sustainability managers. So it's trying to drive that collaboration, coordination, and that assess, deploy, and then monitor. And that monitoring piece then feeds back into the front end as well. So here's what we achieved with this solution. Is that going to be representative of the next projects that I want to roll out? And what can we learn from it that we can change for the next one?
Okay. And something I didn't hear you mention, and maybe I just didn't hear it, or maybe you didn't, is what about permitting for things like these kind of projects?
Yeah.
Are you involved in that as well, or how does that work? Because I know that can be tricky for certain projects at least.
Yeah, what we see today is that the suppliers are doing this all day, every day. And so they are really the experts in this, particularly for their region or their location or their business type. And so we just make sure that the customer is specifying that in their request for proposal that goes to market, and that the supplier is really aware that they're responsible for all that permitting. And then also the incentives are available. That's really, really key to a lot of the...
That was my next question.
Yeah. So that really plays into it. So we really help the customers factor in the core incentives into their financial assessment. So we look at a system technically and financially. So what is the configuration of technologies, but also what's the business case for achieving that? What's my return on investment, my payback period, my internal rate of return, all those kind of key factors. And so we include things like in the US, the Inflation Reduction Act, local incentives that really move the needle. And then we ensure that the customer specifies to the suppliers, here's how we've considered it, here's what I want you to do to achieve that. And if there are any other incentives that we're overlooking, please factor that in. So yeah, we certainly want to support the supply side to be able to differentiate themselves, drive value into the market. What we really want to support customers to do is just make sure that they are creating the right business opportunity and taking control of pushing that into the market, because that's when we see the best opportunities. But we don't want to take away the value that the supply side of the market brings, because the suppliers in this market are awesome. We've got all the technology, all the construction services, all the capital that we need to really move the needle for industries worldwide. But how do we support those suppliers to get access to quality projects and not be chasing this sort of customer indecision? This is the challenge the market faces today. Customer is sold to by supplier. Customer doesn't necessarily trust whether they're being sold the right thing, which leads to indecision, which then leads to a lot of churn and not a lot of action. And so how do we remove that churn? Because that makes up, some of the stats say, between 30 and 70% of project costs today are those kind of bloated soft costs: consulting, engineering, procurement, construction, sales, marketing. So how do we compress all that out of the system and actually pay for the solutions to be deployed versus all the build up to that process?
Okay, nice. Any particularly innovative solutions you've seen rolled out?
Yeah, well, we're seeing definitely multiple technologies being deployed. We're working with a huge aerospace and defense contractor globally, and they have one site in particular that's almost 20 megawatt load. And so they had everything from solar, and this was canopy solar over car parks because they couldn't do rooftop solar, battery energy storage, wind turbine was actually recommended as a priority. What they'll likely do is develop the project without the wind component first, because that takes a little longer to develop, but knowing that they can incorporate that if they want to. And then actually gas turbines for backup. And that was still cleaner than their grid location, which was fairly heavy, still coal and gas. So we've even been able to deploy gas solutions into coal heavy utility areas, really moves the needle. We're seeing some cool opportunities with fuel cells, particularly for industrial customers, as well as waste heat recovery. So a lot of these heavy industries, generate a lot of waste heat, and being able to capture that, create energy, is a really good opportunity. And so we've got suppliers in our marketplace who specialize in that. And so we don't necessarily model that, but we support the customer to capture the specs around what is the waste heat, what are the inputs and outputs of that process that then those specialist companies can really look at. Ice kind of storage as well is an interesting one, creating ice when you've got excess energy, and then using that ice to either generate energy or cool the asset down when you need it. So there's some really interesting technologies in the market today. But I'd say certainly the bulk of it is solar plus storage with some maybe another component added to it.
Right. Yeah. No, because I used to work for SAP, and their North American headquarters in Pennsylvania, in Newtown Square, in their new building there, they've got ice energy storage that you mentioned a while ago, and they use it for aircon. So they generate ice when the electricity is cheap, and then obviously during the day when electricity is more expensive, they can just use the ice as part of the aircon system, and it saves them a lot in terms of emissions and costs as well. So it's a nice system. I got a look at it a few years ago. I got a tour of the facility. Really impressive setup.
Yeah, that's awesome. And certainly, we're seeing lots of very innovative solutions out there. Everything from energy vaults, kind of crane that picks up concrete blocks and drops them and generates and stores energy. It'll be really, really interesting to see how some of these different concepts play out in the market and how scalable they are across the industry. But yeah.
Anything on the EV front?
Yeah, EVs are certainly becoming obviously a hot topic, and particularly with the fact that the grid infrastructure isn't really set up to be able to deal with all that load. And so if you're trying to interconnect to the grid and draw down from the grid, particularly if you want to start deploying level one charges, which have a fairly significant load requirements, I think you can get away with deploying level two charges without too many upgrades or being able to put in a bit of your own solar and storage. But once you start wanting to go to fast charges, it's a totally different story. And so we're not seeing projects pencil unless customers are willing to deploy their own energy solution to be able to support that. If you want to tap into the grid for that, it's not going to work. So yeah, it's a really interesting space. It's something that I don't think customers have really figured out at scale yet, especially even the EV developers. We're not seeing people who are trying to sell the energy staying in business. So they're having to be really creative with how they deploy these systems and what their commercial models are. Some of them have gone down the route of selling the flat screen TV marketing component, and that becomes their source of revenue. Others, it's utilizing the carbon credits or the low carbon fuel standards. So how can they monetize the offsets versus the actual energy component? So I think that industry's got a ways to go, and it'll be interesting to see who cracks that nut in terms of lots of small deployments at scale. I think that's what the industry is struggling with most. Is we've built these mega projects forever, whether it was coal, nuclear, solar, wind, and now all those businesses are set up with very big project mentality and big project focus, and the industry is having to rapidly figure out how to do a lot more projects that are smaller, less margin, and do them across a larger geographic region at scale. So I think that's the real opportunity for those that figure out how to still cover their risk profile, but manage to deploy these systems far more efficiently and effectively. They'll be the ones who win.
Okay. How about things like community grids? Have you been involved in any of those kind of projects?
So we personally don't, because we support the commercial industrial business owners.
I was just wondering, were there any instances where a couple of businesses came together, kind of analogous to community storage?
We personally haven't worked on that, and we're seeing, I think, right in our backyard. I don't know whether you were tracking the Sonova situation where someone had proposed to build a community microgrid in California, and it's being blocked by the commission here. And I think it's very interesting to see what's going on, because I think more and more communities now saying we're not getting what we need from our utility provider. We want to explore other options. And yet it's being blocked because I think once the first one topples, then it becomes a bit of a death spiral for the utility then, because people realize that they can achieve their objectives with other providers, and those other providers can generate a community microgrid or a community solution. And I think this is really now setting the trend for the future energy. I think utilities still think about us as being ratepayers versus being customers. And so their whole commercial model is, how can I spend more capital, include that in your rate, and then deploy that capital? And that is their business model. Instead of thinking about what is in the best interest of our customers, how do we generate affordable, reliable, clean energy, and allow them to almost be prosumers instead of passive consumers. Today, we don't know where the energy comes from, even how we'll get it. We have no control over how much it should cost. And so these community projects are really starting to challenge that status quo. And I think it's exciting. It started here with the community choice aggregators, those who use the utilities transmission distribution infrastructure, but they wholesale buy or develop their own solutions from a generation perspective. I think the utilities that are most forward thinking and realize that they can access more flexible, more resilient infrastructure that's distributed, and then they can just figure out how to orchestrate that. They'll be the ones that succeed, and those that don't, they'll get disrupted. And
Yeah, no, because I was talking a few years ago to the CFO of Vine Energie, who are the big energy providers for Vienna in Austria. And they have a fabulous community solar project going where they build out solar plants and they sell the solar panels to their customers. So they say to the customers, give us, and I'm making the numbers up now, but give us €1,000 and you get access to your own panel and you get the electricity from that panel on a rev share basis. And if you give us €1,000, you'll make this much money from that solar panel over the next 20 years. And they say, if you take that same €1,000 and put it in a deposit account or a high interest savings account, this is how much you would earn from that same €1,000. And you can see that the balance is in favor of the solar panel. And, you know, when they rolled out the first one of those community solar plants, they sold out all the panels in a week. And the subsequent 24 solar plants that they created after that sold out in less than 24 hours each. So it's been wildly successful for them. Now, this was a couple of years ago, so they've probably done a few more since. But I mean, innovative ideas like that are just so cool to hear about.
Yeah. The one I was told about the other day, not quite the same, but I like the kind of community aspect of it, was VB, the brewer down in Australia. They had set up a program where it was essentially a loyalty program where if you as a homeowner had solar panels on your roof and you didn't necessarily need all the energy that you're producing, you could essentially sell that through blockchain technology to the brewery, either in the form of the carbon reduction or the energy itself. And then once you earned a certain amount of dollarage, you then got sent straight to beer. And so it became, you know, a really cool kind of loyalty program where it was kind of, you know, customers back, but they actually got the value of a steady flow of their beer of choice. So I really like that, and I'm excited to see how
as a devoted beer drinker, that one speaks straight to my heart.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe my liver.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I genuinely think that's the future, isn't it? I think all of us will be prosumers in the sense that we'll have easy to use apps. You know, once the tech guys really get involved in this space and we have an easy to use an app where we can say, these appliances in my home, I don't care whether they need to be turned off when the grid needs the energy, and I'm happy to be compensated for it. Or I over generate in these times and I'm willing to sell that back to whether it's your neighbor, whether it's your local charity, whether it's to a corporate who has set these targets and they don't know how to achieve them. You know, maybe you can exchange your carbon credits for access to their product or their services. And so I think it'll really create that circular economy and almost take us back to the day of communities being really self-dependent and being able to trade value. Not everyone is going to be able to afford all the solar panels and batteries that they need, but they can source the energy from their neighbor at a fraction of the cost. And so I think that's how we build real sustainable communities of the future.
Yeah, if my solar panels are making me beer, I'm happy. Speaking of Austria, Australia, places like that, what markets are you guys addressing?
Yep. Today, our biggest focus from a sales and marketing perspective is certainly the US. That's certainly where the market has the most pain, I'd say, right now, and also the most opportunity to grow at scale, especially the likes of the Inflation Reduction Act. So being released, and there being hundreds of billions of dollars of incentive money being pushed into the industry. I'd actually
also
say
has some of the US also has some of the oldest, creakiest infrastructure, right? I remember hearing about 10 years ago, I remember hearing that the expected lifespan of a substation was 30 years and the average lifespan of the average age of a substation in the US was 50. So it's like, whoops.
Yeah.
That's your problem right there.
Exactly. It really is. And it is a massive problem. And people don't realize how big of a problem it is until the lights do go off. You know, we always think it's going to happen to someone else until it doesn't. And then it happens to us. And suddenly you get that eerie quiet sound when everything shuts down. Yeah, we're doing projects all around the world, you know. So we've got a big customer in Europe who has a huge customer base that we're starting to get a lot of exposure through their channels into that market. We've done projects in Africa, Australia, Southeast Asia. I think the areas in the news that are experiencing some of the biggest needs right now, South Africa is really in trouble. You know, the utility there is turning the power off 12 hours a day. And so it's impossible to run a business when you have no guaranteed energy. And this was honestly the catalyst, one of the catalysts for me with Veckta, Tom. Is I saw this kind of firsthand when I was working on the ground in Iraq. We were there helping oil and gas companies to extract some of the biggest oil and gas reserves in the world to feed our, your and my energy needs. And yet, after 20 years of war, their infrastructure there was devastated. And so they had access to 2 to 4 hours of power a day. People are having to run on diesel gensets if they can afford it. And you can see how much of an impact that then has on communities, on businesses. It's impossible to survive. And unfortunately, South Africa is going that way. And I think people feel like South Africa, it's a completely different situation to what we could see in Europe or America. But actually, there's a lot of parallels, and it doesn't take many things
no, it's got huge potential.
Yeah.
If you'll pardon the pun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it. And so I think we all need to be aware of that and support the industry.
Yeah, nice. Where to next for Veckta?
Yeah, early days in this industry. I think people are really starting to understand the pain points and the opportunities. And so we want to be the platform every business leader in the world thinks about when they're thinking about their energy transition. So there's a lot of work we've got to do to educate the market, build our brand, build our awareness. So there's a huge part of that is supporting your listeners to understand what's going on around the world and the opportunities for them as a business. And so that's really what we're driving. And the beauty about software products is we can continually refine, improve, and build out the features that our customers need. And so we want to go on that journey with our customers. This is not a one and done opportunity for businesses. This is a 10, 20, 30 plus year transition. So let's learn together. Let's empower each other. Let's collaborate. Let's figure out what we all need. And let's go on the journey together, because we're not going to fix this individually or overnight. And so our job, the reason why Veckta exists is to bring the whole market up together. Let's support customers, but let's also empower the supply side of the market. And that's how we win, is driving down the cost of these systems, making more people aware of them, making the whole ecosystem more efficient and effective together. And then we can see mass deployment of these systems and really help reduce our emissions while also profitable outcomes.
Nice. Lovely. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Gareth. Is there any question that I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I'd just say that for business leaders, I know it can feel overwhelming. It can feel complex. You see some of the stats coming out of Accenture and CDP. Businesses are making the right commitments. And so I applaud all of you for making these commitments. Let's now turn these commitments and these ideas in action, because that's when you really benefit. You have much value from the marketing campaigns, but truly actually executing these plans will really differentiate you. And I think in any transition, there are winners and there's losers. And I would hope that none of your listeners end up on the losing side of that equation, because the businesses that will win are the people who adapt purposefully and really see the transition as being an opportunity to really accelerate their businesses and stand out and build customer loyalty and employee loyalty, and also do right by our communities while also being able to make more money to deploy it back into the likes of these opportunities. So that would be the closing comment.
Lovely. Great. Gareth, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we talked about on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
Yeah, Veckta is a great resource. Our website, www.veckta.com. We're also very active on LinkedIn and Twitter through Veckta. And then for myself, LinkedIn's probably the best place to catch me, Gareth.Evans, GarethEvans. And if you look at Gareth Evans Veckta, you should find me. But I can also share my Linktree link,
sure,
Tom, that you can attach, and that's got access to all YouTube channels, social media feeds. So yeah.
Perfect. Shoot me across that link and I'll put it in the show notes, and that way everyone will have access to it, Gareth. Great.
Sounds great. Cheers, Tom.
That's been fascinating, Gareth. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to next time.